from? It's it's no note or anything. There's no note or anything. Whoever got me that, thank you so much. Beware of the aliens, mate. Where's this gonna go? Where do you go, my
So
lovely? Where do you go?
we're just gonna test this and see how it works. Okay. Sounds decent. Let me turn it down. Is that better? How about that? Huh. Okay, let's try that. So I'm gonna go down to like 20. Yeah, that should be good. I don't know, maybe a little louder. I think that's good. We'll go at 26. All right, cool. Hopefully that's good. We'll go ahead and go ahead and turn this off. Sweet. All right.
Say hello to my little friend.
Okay. So so
In this week's episode of Weapon.
yeah.
Weaponized.
This phenomenon, like, we know it's global, but I don't really know if people appreciate just how much this phenomenon blankets the earth every single day.
The final 3 episodes of season 1 of Weaponized begins now.
They've taken our nukes offline. They've done that in Russia and other places in the world.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know what their time frame is, what the ultimate goal of this long-term surveillance is.
I hardly ever hear asked by anyone. Forget the mainstream, but even in our community, what are they doing?
Yeah.
Are they still abducting people? Answer, yes, they are still abducting people. They are.
Secrets, cover-ups, and strange phenomena.
UFOs and ideas that challenge reality itself. All these mysteries, all this time. Are we ever going to get to the bottom of these?
My name is George Knapp. I dig into news stories that others can't or won't.
I'm Jeremy Corbell, and for some reason, people tell me things they probably shouldn't. And this is Weaponized.
Millie, I'm joined by Vanilli. No, Jeremy, of course. We've been away for a couple of weeks, as you might have noticed. Me slaving away in a salt mine and Jeremy basking away on a beach somewhere drinking pina coladas. But we are back, and we have a special guest. Richard Dolan is a gifted historian who came into the UFO topic, I think, because of studies he was doing about U.S. national security and the Cold War. And I hope I'm characterizing this correctly, but he kept running into bits and pieces about the UFO mystery and what looked like attempted cover-ups and secrecy. You know, when people ask me, as they often do, what UFO books I might recommend, Richard Dolan's books are always right there at the top of the list. They're meticulously researched. It's incisive writing. There's no fluff. Among the many books on my bookshelf, UFOs and the National Security State, Volume 1, UFOs and the National Security State, Volume 2, mandatory reading if you're serious about the topic. There's a fun book called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, and a really cool one that he co-wrote with our friend Bryce Zabel, AD After Disclosure, imagining an informed imagination of what the day after disclosure might look like. He is a voice of reason and a wild and wacky topic, and both Jeremiah and I are big supporters of his work. And Richard, we're just thrilled to have you here on Weaponized.
Thank you so much, George. That was a lovely introduction. And I am equally thrilled to be on this excellent program that both of you have been just really helping to elevate the conversation in this field and to provide breaking, innovative information for people that we need to hear. So I'm happy to be part of this with you guys.
And yeah, I'm super pumped because look, when I came into this after you guys were the touchstones for me when I saw that the 3-part series that you did with your books, Richard, it was awesome. So kind of coming into it, I kind of learned from the things that you wrote. I heard you on Coast to Coast. So over that time, we've developed a friendship and a relationship, and I've really respected the way that you've approached the topic over the years. This is a very unique time for us to get together because I've seen now from the trailer, there's a new show coming out. Actually, it's a 3-night event, a 3-part series on Tubi in partnership with TMZ. And it's a really hardcore, hard-hitting documentary series. And there you are talking as, kind of the historian, the historic, the Akashic record for the UFO topic. So my experience with you is that, as I was getting into this, I really looked to your work because I felt like you were a straight shooter with all of it. And so here we are many, many, many years later, and we have this series coming out that you're highly featured in. And I think for people listening, that's coming out tonight. So you can go check that out.
right.
Out on Tubi.
You've said that the U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
What I personally witnessed myself was very disturbing.
It has been since the inception of the UFO problem. Nothing to see here. All of that has changed.
A multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program.
A genuine disclosure of the UAP UFO subject would be the most earth-shattering thing imaginable.
It would be the biggest story in history. The biggest story, period.
Here was a phenomenon that the government couldn't protect us from.
The greatest superpower the Earth has ever known basically admitted there was no way they could defend themselves.
I don't trust the U.S. government, and I'm a United States congressman. They told me that I'd kicked a hornet's nest, and I needed to get some bodies around me.
This information is the most deeply held secrets in the entire government, and that includes the President of the United States.
Do not talk about these things, or things will not go well for you. This is like the mafia.
Have anyone been murdered?
I have to be careful asking that question.
The attacks on you, is there any moment where you regretted speaking up?
I don't regret it. It's, I didn't want to live in the Matrix when there's stuff like this that's being hidden from the world populace.
Past the foot of my bed, there were two gray, non-human beings.
The aerospace defense companies, these are people who understand how to play high-level chess.
Somebody's going to walk out of one of these labs with this information and puts it out on the internet before they commit suicide by shooting themselves in the back of the head 5 times.
The footage was captured by our military. It's in Iraq. It was treated with just spectacular secrecy.
Just be careful. Don't step on the wrong toes.
So I've got a still image of something that I have learned to be called the chandelier UAP. Does that ring a bell to you?
It does.
Do you think Chuck Schumer would put forward an amendment about UAPs and disclosure, putting the reputation of the entire Senate at risk with the upcoming election? I mean, I don't know how much more one needs.
This subject is a problem. It's a problem they can't control.
I know for a matter of fact that the UFO topic is considered more important at a higher level of security than weapons of mass destruction.
This is potentially world-conquering information, technology that can change the course of mankind.
A society that has lived a foundational lie for an entire human lifetime. I don't know what gets bigger than that.
To keep things secret, people are silenced. I don't know how better to say that.
I think the cool part about us being together is we talk behind the scenes. We've kind of followed, each other's paths as we go through this. And we all come to these conclusions of like, what do we think is going on? And this is such a unique time. The show's titled UFO Revolution. And I really do think we're living in a revolutionary time when it comes to acceptance and confirmation of whatever it is that's going on. So it couldn't be better time to have you. I'm super, super pumped to have you on, man.
Thanks. Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
What can we do, I think, for our audience with this, unique opportunity right now to kind of talk before a lot of stuff is coming out over the next few days? What is it we can do? I was thinking, your historical look, we need a historian right now. We need somebody to say, look, we've been here, but this is a unique moment. So I think I'd love to open with just talking with you about what do you see is going on right now today that is different than what's been going on for the last couple decades or further in the UFO field? Why is it different today with everything that's happened over the last 12 months?
Yeah, great. I would like to address that, but I will want to start by when we talked about the history just a moment ago. One thing that people need to know, they need to absolutely know this without any question, is that when we talk about UFO, now UAP, and the Arrow office through the Pentagon, people need to understand that there has been longstanding United States military interactions with these UFOs, UAP, since the 1940s at a minimum. Let's just start there. This is absolutely take to the bank documentary evidence. We're talking dramatic. We're talking, in many cases, shocking types of encounters that not just the United States military, but really all militaries, but let's focus on the U.S., have been having throughout its entire history post-World War II. And so I just think it's very important for people to understand when we get statements from, whether it's people like Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick or any other representative from the Pentagon, and when they make statements to the effect that, well, we are going to look into these UAP, we will get back to you, I just think people need to understand. They know full well what's going on. They have known full well what is going on. And if their spokesperson doesn't know, that doesn't mean that the other elements in the hierarchy don't know. They absolutely are very much on top of this, because this has been a problem for them for full on 80 years. And a problem that in many cases, I don't think they really know fully how to deal with, because it's difficult. These objects do have very superior capabilities, superior technology. They have been, if you want to get technical, they've been violating sensitive national security, airspace, and let's say water space and space for a long time. And the U.S. military has limited resources to be able to deal with it, in my view. And so that's problem number one. Now, you ask what's different about today. Well, I think what's different about today is that this is something that I've been looking at and looking into for well over 10, 15 years. Like many of us, looking at the transformation that the world has been going through, the web and all of the digital communication. I have felt for a long time that the moment we're having has been somewhat inevitable, in the sense that we hit kind of a critical mass in our society, in our ability to share information, to share data. It's an interesting fact that when the internet began in the 1980s, the first major subject to blow open the internet was UFOs. It was UFOs back in the late 80s. So there's always been this groundswell of public interest in this subject, despite the fact that we've been hit over the head with a propaganda hammer for years and decades to say, no, this is a silly topic, don't get into it. But people know we've got an instinct, we have a nose for this. And so I've always reasoned that by the time we hit enough of a critical mass in our global infrastructure, our ability to share important information, that something would break through. And I think that is what has happened. I believe that over the first decade of this century, and then think about what happened. You had Stephen Greer's press conference in 2001. You had Steve Bassett pushing through the X conferences and the citizen hearing on disclosure. You had the press conferences by Robert Hastings and a lot of the other folks dealing, and Leslie Kean, James Fox. All of these are part of a public initiative that over the course of this first 21st century did help to raise awareness. It did happen. And then you get 2016 and John Podesta and Hillary making the decision. UFOs is not the death sentence for a political candidate. That was key. And then you get TTSA. And I think all of this is the end result of a cultural movement that essentially reached critical mass. And that includes behind the scenes, that includes in front of the scenes. And so that's what I think's happened. So, when TTSA was going full guns, I encountered many, many people who said, that's a CIA op, that's a lot of BS. I always fought against that interpretation. I never believed it. I always felt that those folks were, some of them are a little more establishment oriented than myself. That's true. But understanding their motivations, I always felt that those were legit motivations. I still believe that. And I think, what really are we looking at? You had Chris Mellon behind the scenes bringing Eric Davis in to speak to members of Congress a couple of years ago. That clearly had an impact. A lot of the work that you guys did behind the scenes had an impact. And what we're seeing now, I think, is enough of this toothpaste is out of the tube, that people now are permitted to talk about it. And it's what we're now seeing is a battle, a war within the national security establishment. That's really what we're seeing. It's a factional war. So you have the old OG Donald Kehoe decades ago called the secrecy group.
What he's saying is 100% true. There is a faction war going on within our government, for disclosure. But another thing is, I think more people are being contacted and more people are having sightings than ever before. And that's playing a major role in all of this.
Group, they're still around. But you have what I like to call the insurgency. And we're all part of that insurgency. You guys are very active in it. David Grush now is part of the insurgency. Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean are part of the insurgency. Chris Mellon, Tom DeLonge, Hal Puthoff, they're part of the insurgency as well. And they've made their push, and we are now seeing the result. We've had congressional hearings. We have the promise of more hearings in the future. We had a bit of a battle over the UAP Disclosure Act, not a surprise. And so this is where we are. We are at a turning point. Whether this will result in a genuine, honest disclosure is a whole other question. But we're at a point where, in the history of this phenomenon, we've never been here before. There were moments in the 1960s where people thought this could break open. The old Condon Committee. Will the University of Colorado give an honest scientific conclusion on this? And we now know that was a rigged game. And there have been a variety of moments in the past where things briefly looked like they could break open, but nothing like this. I feel this is qualitatively different. So I think it's the end result of a long-standing technological cultural transformation. That's what I think.
You were, as I mentioned, you started looking at the Cold War as an historian at national security issues, where it eventually leads, what it means to our republic, excessive secrecy. Looking back on that now, are you sympathetic at all to the U.S. military and its extreme paranoia about keeping a lid on the UFO issue at the time when the start of the modern UFO era? And has that changed for them, or is it always going to be inextricably intertwined with national security concerns?
I have some sympathy for them, yes. Always kind of have, but I also don't. I mean, let me qualify it. So if you are in the military establishment, your duty is to protect your national security. That's your job. And these objects, although they haven't done an Independence Day scenario, they haven't blown up anything overtly, they have at times caused problems, which maybe we can discuss some of that, but there hasn't been like an obvious destructive attack, a systematic destructive attack. There have been, negative encounters from time to time. There's been damage done and interference done to U.S. military weapon capability, communications capability. That's all happened. But it hasn't been like they've been out there on the attack so much as seemingly observing. So on that basis, ordinary people might just think, well, they're not doing anything dangerous. But if you're in the military, you cannot accept that. Your job is to make sure that your airspace is secure, your systems are secure, and so forth. And so they have to be very careful. And then on top of that, let's go into the crash retrieval scenario. So we can pretty confidently say that the U.S. military has acquired exotic technology that does not come from here. 10 years ago, you couldn't really make that statement as confidently out in the open, but I think we all kind of understand, yes, it's obviously true. So if that's happened, they're protecting not simply alien tech, but they're protecting 75 plus years of their own research into anti-grav, into material science, into propulsion and whatever. And whatever one thinks about international geopolitics, whatever one thinks about Russia or China,
Okay. So, as far as them keeping the technology and everything under wraps, I think they're gonna keep it that way. They have no reason to release it because the moment they release it, all of the oil in the world will basically be reduced to nothing in value. I'm talking about all the oil they've pumped and all the oil that there ever would be. The stuff that's still in the ground would basically devaluate overnight. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's still a lot of countries. All the countries would still be dependent on it because it's not like you can transition overnight. But they've invested so much money into procuring leases on a lot of this land where they pump. They're not going to just let this stuff come out and let all that money go to waste. Because I mean, they have these contracts set up years in advance, and some of these contracts, you know, these contracts, some of them, they'll be set up so that way they can pump on someone's land for like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever. Just depends on how the negotiation goes. And I only know this from experience because I actually have mineral rights in North Dakota, and I did lease them out for a while. There was no oil on it, but they still paid me money to go check it out. So, anyways, that's just my take on it. The only way this stuff comes out is if somebody who operates this technology will actually come forward and put it out there. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. They have too much to lose. I mean, a lot of these people have families, and you know, they have job security set up for once they get out of these programs. So yeah, I just don't see it happening.
The fact is, the United States has a very adversarial relationship with those nations, and the military does not ever wish to expose that. It would be like if the president were to say, yes, this is real, they're here. There are so many implications that follow from that statement, eventually leading to, what is the status of your technological development that you have been working on all these years? And it just threatens to expose that. So that's not something that they're ever going to be willing. On the other hand, on the same time, it's no one wants to admit, in an era where you're never supposed to believe in conspiracies anymore, no more conspiracy theories, for the U.S. government, which is having a very difficult time maintaining credibility in much of the world these days, for the U.S. government to say, you don't believe in those conspiracies, well, except this biggest one of all time. That one's true, the UFO. But don't believe in the others, like that's a bad look. So, but now, where I'm not sympathetic is, even from the military's perspective here, is I don't trust the United States government anymore. I don't have trust in its goodwill. I don't have trust in its desire to do good in the world.
Nope. Hell no.
I just don't. And in the old days, I might have thought, well, you know, it's a complicated world out there. But I don't see that. So what I see is that the United States is the global fire starter. It's my opinion. People can agree or not with that. And so I don't really have a lot of sympathy for the secrecy being maintained by a system that I actually have come to feel is malignant, rather than neutral, which is maybe what I might have thought in the past. So my sympathy level's gone way down on that basis.
You know, I'll say one more thing, Jeremy, then you can take it from there. You know, in the early days, when I got started, what hooked me were the reports, the memos, the confidential things, the paperwork that went back and forth within the Pentagon, where they were very candid with each other about the legitimacy of this mystery and why it could represent a threat. And, that was long before FOIA, before they ever thought any of this paperwork would ever be seen. Now they're pretty good at hiding stuff now that FOIA is the law of the land, but that's what hooked me. And I wonder if that is what hooked you as well. What you were reading back then that got you down this path.
Yeah, that is exactly what hooked me, George. You almost got my entry into this correct, but there are a couple of differences. So my academic study in the early 90s was U.S. Cold War strategy, national security strategy, circa 1950, outbreak of the Korean War period. And had nothing to do with UFOs. But I saw a copy of Tim Good's classic book, Above Top Secret, at a bookstore in the very early 90s. And I thought, wow, subtitles are what caught my eye. It was the Worldwide UFO Cover-Up. That was the subtitle of that. Very classic book. And I recalled flipping through the book, recognizing many of the names from my own academic work, recognizing, of course, many of the departments that he had in there. But he placed everything within a UFO cover-up context. That was new for me, and that intrigued me. And it was a kind of an ontological shock, as they now like to say. I was shocked in the sense of thinking, is this true or is this not true? Because if there's any truth to this, why have I never read anything about this in any single academic history book ever? Why? And so I bought Tim's book and I read it and I thought, this is actually a very excellent book. And I did my dive, which I thought would last for a few months. And famous last words. And so, yes, I became convinced fairly early on that there was a significant cover-up conspiracy on the matter of UFOs, government lying and all of that. And I just could never leave after that. Couldn't leave the field.
Yeah. So I think this is so important to break down for the people that are listening that might be new to the UFO topic since 2017 and everything that we saw happen with the New York Times article, kind of helping to bring this into the public eye of pop culture. You're of the understanding that there was this dirty little secret, like a UFO cover-up by our government, justified or not. What I'd love to hear from you is like, why and what were the methods of the cover-up, the architecture of this cover-up? How did our government and why did our government cover up the UFO reality to the American public? Why and how?
Yeah. The why, go rewind the clock, go back to the late 1940s. So World War II has just ended. Europe is lying on its back after all the warfare. The United States is sitting pretty, but now this new problem arises. There's the Cold War is starting. And now your President Harry Truman and your people say to you, sir, we apparently have recovered technology that doesn't come from this civilization. And that's a heavy duty thing to deal with. I mean, there might be an instinct to want to share that information with the world, but your advisors would very quickly disabuse you of the wisdom of that idea. They would say, look, if you tell the world you've recovered this, A, we don't even know if these aliens are friend or foe. We don't know anything about that. Do you have an answer for that, sir? No. Also, we've got this technology. We don't want the Russians to have our atomic technology. Do we honestly think we're going to want to share something as exotic as alien technology? No, obviously. So you make the decision immediately to get a lid on this. Now you've got to put your team together. You have to assign responsibilities. Your job will be to study the tech. What can we do with this? Your job will be to control the media, control the press. Your job will be to probably control the academic institutions to whatever extent possible. And your job will be to find out how bad will public panic be, and so on. And so that's the beginning. Now, how do you control it? Well, you eventually learn to privatize your secret, especially after the FOIA era starts. But even throughout, like you've got private industry. So they've got more and better scientists than you have within the DOD. Lockheed, McDonnell, Raytheon, Boeing, all of the usual suspects. They've got the money, they've got the geniuses, and you start segueing out the technology. Essentially what Philip Corso argued 25 years ago. That's the logical scenario. But then you have to manage the press. This is very important. And we all know now, we grew up in an era where the U.S. government was still never supposed to engage in that activity. We all know now about things like Operation Mockingbird. This was CIA management of mainstream news media. It's all out in the open. Hundreds of journalists on the payroll, writing stories for CIA. Back when this came out in the late 70s, we were shocked that we would do such a thing. We now all understand that the media is utterly managed and controlled. But back in the 40s and 50s, this was a key thing. And we know there's a tie-in between Mockingbird and UFOs. There's something like the infamous Robertson panel of early 1953, where the CIA organized its strategy for managing the media and controlling the UFO subject and for disabling it, essentially kneecapping it for the public, creating a culture of ridicule, creating a culture of disbelief. They did a great job with that. They did the same essentially within the academic world. Been much less study of this, but the CIA's management of U.S. scholarship, it has been well documented on a number of occasions. And there hasn't been, to my knowledge, a really good study of the specifics dealing with UAP here, but it fits exactly with the every other subject indicated, like within the CIA's management of the academic community. And then the politicians as well. How that has worked specifically will be the subject for future historians, because this needs to be understood. Threats, bribery, all of that, the carrot and the stick, clearly have probably worked their way in there as well. And that's a subject for further study. So that's how you control the argument. You have to control the public discourse. And the fact is, the United States is the best propagandists in the world. We know how to control narratives, the U.S. government. The intelligence community is very, very good at that. So that's how you control it on that basis. Then you have to manage your allies, your geopolitical allies. And you do that through all kinds of extra legal relationships. We talk about the Five Eyes: U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. That's a espionage-related information gathering thing. But it actually exists in an extra legal capacity beyond the laws of those individual countries. I've always believed that the United States has that kind of power over its allies easily. And I think they do that. For example, when Snowden's revelations came out a decade ago, we learned that Angela Merkel of Germany, that her emails and her phone was being monitored by, I think, NSA. We learned that Dilma Rousseff of Brazil had her phone completely monitored by NSA. Point being, if you were a national leader of another country and you wanted to do a disclosure outside of the U.S., it would be impossible for you to do that without the U.S. knowing about it. They would know everything. And the power and control that the United States exerts behind the scenes is overwhelming in most cases. Now, there are nations that are not in that control: Russia, China, probably India, and that list is now growing. And so those nations you could consider them wild cards. But within the U.S. sphere of domination, that's most of the nations, frankly. They don't have genuine sovereignty. So that's how you control it internationally. And then you work out arrangements with countries like Russia or the Soviet Union and things like that. So there's a lot of means by which control must be exerted over UFO tech and the reality. And it gets harder to do.
Yeah, it definitely would be a tough thing to get out. Thing is, though, in our country, we have a problem with our media. As long as they control the narrative, the truth will never get out. The actual truth. It's always going to be morphed or altered or just plain out like lies sometimes. So, yeah, for us to move forward with this whole thing, it's going to come down to us, the people. People are going to start being contacted They're gonna start seeing things. People are gonna start talking, conversating. Eventually, the cat will be out of the bag, and that will be that. And we will officially have disclosure. That's just what I think, anyways. Not that it matters.
I think that the challenges become new each decade, it seems to me.
You know, I want to be encouraged by recent developments. UFO world is notoriously impatient. Oh my gosh, when are we going to see this? It's been 5 whole years and we haven't seen the goodies yet. We need to see it right now. Show me the evidence. And, you know, of course, life doesn't work that way. Well, we've had periods like this before. You write about it in your books where there was mainstream media coverage. It gave a certain amount of cover to politicians, members of Congress to ask questions. In the 50s, in the 60s, there were movements. They were responding to public interest and public pressure, and then it got shut down. You know, we were all encouraged by what happened with that New York Times story. It's a remarkable thing that Ralph and Leslie and Aline Cooper did to get that on the front page in the Times and then a couple other stories. But now the Times has sort of reverted to what it's been for 50 years. Pretty hostile UFO topic. Washington Post did some stories and then went the other direction. You know, the toothpaste is out of the tube, but it's been crammed into the tube, back into the tube a couple times, as you write, right?
That's right. And the New York Times, my opinion, I'd like to know what you guys think about this. I think the only reason the New York Times did this at all was damage control. I mean, Leslie and Ralph pushed this. Aline Cooper was in on it too. But they basically, you know, first of all, Chris Mellon was pushing the story, was shopping it around. He got Politico to look at it. I don't know all of the machinations behind the scenes with the New York Times, but my assumption has always been Leslie and Ralph pushed this story. They were sympathetic to it, and they were able to get it approved probably because the New York Times realized this is coming out. TTSA was brand new. You had Elizondo, who was starting to talk. The ATIP program was going to come out. I think it was inevitable. The Tic Tac UFO encounter was very likely going to come out. This was happening. And so if you're the New York Times editorial management, you might be thinking, okay, we're going to do this because we're going to manage the story. And if you read particularly the ATIP story, where they announced that, oh yes, the Pentagon has been studying UFOs all this time, they brought in some gratuitous skeptical comments, one by James Oberg and one by, I think, some Yale astronomer, neither of which were relevant whatsoever. But this is the New York Times. I have no doubt this was not Leslie or Ralph's decision here, guaranteed. New York Times said, we're going to bring some skeptical voices in here. So they were always playing that game. Now, all of the New York Times articles that are worth anything on this, as far as I could tell, were written by Leslie and Ralph. And I don't think they had any decent coverage by any of their other journalists. And the last story that Leslie and Ralph did for the Times was back in 2020. They haven't done anything. So I think that their policy is still deep state playing defense for the secrecy group. And the Washington Post is essentially a CIA publication to begin with. So I don't think that they were ever really genuinely pushing this. I think that their editorial management policies are still very much on the side of secrecy. I don't see them as allies.
I think part of the attraction for the Times editors might have been, hey, this is a Harry Reid boondoggle. We can give him a shot in the ribs with this thing. Looks like he got $22 million for one of his campaign buddies, and that was part of the attraction. You know, The Missing Times, I'm sure you've read that book by Terry Hansen, sort of the history of the New York Times attitude toward UFOs. It's pretty terrific.
Yeah.
Jeremy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just love for our audience, because what I hear a lot is, you know, show me now. Everybody's so demanding what's going on, but there's been a long path to get here. So, you know, there were moments where we were, I guess, close to confirmation or some sort of what you'd call disclosure prior to this moment. I just want to know, are you optimistic with where we are now, and how specifically is this moment different from a historical perspective?
Well, are we close? So I've wondered about this a lot. So can there be what would constitute a disclosure moment? And I've asked myself this, and I keep coming back down to one person as the president of the United States. I can't really think of another. I mean, you could say Xi Jinping or Vladimir Putin could do it. They would have, but even could they get away with it in the face of a global media that's still dominated by the United States? I don't know. It might be difficult to ignore, but it's the United States president, whoever that is. It doesn't even matter who the person is, has to make the statement. And so I wonder, like for 2024, will President Joe Biden actually make a disclosure statement? I don't see that as very likely whatsoever. I don't, unless as a campaign thing, like if he is actually going to run, I mean, it seems like he's running unopposed in his own party, that could change. But if he's actually going to run and he's behind on the polls, would he bring up the UFO issue? I have wondered. I don't see it as likely, because I just feel like there's too much pressure on the establishment side of it, on the national security side of it, to allow for that to happen. It would, I think, what the best chance for things to break open, in my opinion, it would be another round of congressional hearings. I might have thought if the UAP Disclosure Act had gotten passed in its original pristine form, but that was a long shot to begin with. But now that that's not the case, I would say congressional hearings are a real possibility. I mean, I only hear rumors. You guys probably even hear more than that, but I keep hearing that there are people every bit as explosive as David Grush. I believe that. And if they are to come before Congress to speak, could that have an effect? And I would think, yeah, it could have an effect. That could cause a real problem. So that's the real wild card.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely two things going on. We can, speak from direct knowledge, is that there are people coming forward through a process, not necessarily straight to Arrow, but there's a process not going to Arrow, where people are coming forward with direct firsthand knowledge and understanding program names, current employment in these, what they call, NHI technology programs. Like, that is a fact. You can take that to the bank. Now, is that going to be put out publicly? So that's what I'm kind of interested in with you is, are you optimistic from what you're seeing that we are in a different moment and that we really do have a chance to come clean with the American public about this? I don't know what it'll take either. I don't know if it'll take a president saying it. I don't know if it's going to take a whistleblower leaking something directly, but I think leaks will play a role in this. But my question to you is, like, are you optimistic from what you're seeing? Are we close to be, coming clean with the American global public about the reality UFOs? I'm going to say no, I don't think so. I think that the United States government is honestly incapable of coming clean on almost anything that I can think. And I don't mean to say that for laughs. It's true, though. The United States government has never talked about this subject in good faith, ever. Right. Not ever. And, so what would it take? The only thing that it would take would be for utterly explosive testimony to come out. But actually, think about it. Grush's testimony last July was explosive. If I were to go back 10 years ago and envision a man like David Grush speaking to Congress, saying the things he did back in 2013, I would have thought, that's disclosure right there. There's no way that anyone can argue against this. It's a done deal. It's all going to come out. And yet it hasn't. You still have the U.S. government's not saying anything. The establishment media is not doing any follow-up that's worth anything here, really. You got some independent media, but the big players, they're really not. There was... before he left Fox, it was Tucker Carlson. He was really the one, from what I can see, major top-level mainstream voice that was willing to give this subject the time of day, and he's not there anymore. So there's no one at Fox, there's no one in the rest of the mainstream media in the highest levels that is really willing to push this issue in an intelligent way.
they all do their work for the national security state. This is my take on it. So I don't know what's whoever does the hearing, whoever does testimony is going to have some serious bona fides and some really confirmable factual data. And I would have thought Grush had the goods, because I think he does have the goods, and the only thing that prevented it coming out were his security clearances. I thought people would understand that, but yet nothing has come out as a result of it.
Let me interject for 1 second. So there's what is public and in pop culture and on mass media when you turn on CNN, Fox, or these big stations, but there's also a lot going on behind the scenes, and we see evidence of that. So let me tell you what I know and what I think we're seeing evidence of, and maybe it'll make us a little more optimistic. But the entire legislation that was put forward, that wasn't created in a vacuum. They specifically knew and had people come testify with absolute detail, programs, materials, locations, everything. I'm telling you straight up, that's why that legislation was written. So although it's not on Fox and CNN and pop culture and consensus reality hasn't embraced the basic fundamental aspects of UFOs, we've seen a huge change. But internally, you start seeing that like this legislation is being made. People are
seeing the language of the original UAP Disclosure Act. It was phenomenal. It was really incredible.
So my argument is that what you're seeing is that when we say the government, sure, I don't know who the government is that's going to say this shit is real. But what I do see is good people in government who believe in transparency to the American public as patriots, and without harming national security, they are pushing on the inside to get this out as a public issue. That lets us be a little optimistic, right?
I would agree with you. I agree with everything you just said there, Jeremy. And yeah, there are forces even within the government, within Congress, who I believe firmly, just as both of you believe, are on the good side here, and they want transparency, they want truth. I don't know how much they actually know about the implications of this. Like, I really wonder. By that, I simply mean, I co-authored a book on disclosure 13 years ago, and Bryce Zabel and I concluded that a genuine, honest disclosure of this subject is so utterly revolutionary. And I still believe that.
What do you mean? Tell me what that means. Like, what does it mean that it's so revolutionary? Like, what are the impacts that happen from a true, honest discussion about what is known?
Well, you start with multiple layers. So one is culpability. Who is guilty of a 75+ year cover-up? That's going to have to come up at some point. I cannot imagine it not coming up in some way. People will eventually want to know, how did you lie to us for all of these years? How did you damage what was supposed to be free institutions for our entire lifetime? How have you kept the secret? How does the special access program system work, by which this secret is managed, by which the technology is being studied? Like, all of that will have to come out. And I think that's a very uncomfortable thing for them. But then on top of that, and dealing with the technology and the revolutionary implications of the technology that will certainly be welcome for many of us, but will, even under the best conditions, probably be very disruptive for the general society. Would have to be. And disruptions are not welcome if you are running a global system. But then on top of that, the more fundamental existential questions. Who are these other beings and what are they doing? Like, that's a difficult question to answer. When I look at this, I've been in the weeds of reading thousands and thousands of UFO reports over these last few years for my latest book project. And I've gone through all of the database of the National UFO Reporting Center, and I've gone through all of the database of MUFON. And I just read hundreds and thousands of reports on a regular basis. And I can tell you and the listeners here, this phenomenon, like, we know it's global, but I don't really know if people appreciate just how much this phenomenon blankets the earth every single day, over populated areas, over non-populated areas.
I've said this once and I'll say it again. These things, whoever they are everywhere at once, at all times. They're everywhere, all times, everywhere around you. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. Our perception of the electromagnetic spectrum is like this much out of this much. So we can only see this much of reality. So you have so many other species or whatever, creatures, aliens, angels, demons, all in these other spectrums, and we would never know they were there.
Areas over land, over water, in the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, over every body, over every part of the world. We have better ability to report them in North America, so we have many more reports. But the fact is, this is everywhere. And so the obvious question is, who are these guys? What are they doing? Do we have anything to worry about? And you know, I mean, the fact is, I've spent full time more than a quarter of a century trying to understand this, and it's hard for me to answer that. Like if I were responsible for doing counterintelligence on behalf of planet Earth and the human race, I would have to assume that there is a potential threat and a potential danger. I would have to assume that. It doesn't mean that all of the UFOs out there are malevolent. And I don't believe that all of them are malevolent, but I would have to wonder. Because I love having theories. I come up with new theories all the time about why I think they're here. And I believe right now, human species and planet Earth is where the action is happening in this whole part of the galaxy. I think this is the jam. If you are an intelligence from any part of the galaxy that can come here, you're going to be here. Why? Because humanity, first of all, because we have an amazing planet. And there may be lots of life out there, but planets like ours, I would be willing to bet the mortgage and beyond, are rare and are valuable. We've got water, we have land and ocean. Not all planets, even with life, have that. We have an incredible abundance of life and unique genetic material. Like, that's got to be valuable. But on top of that, humanity, the apex predator of the planet, have now in the last 150, 200 years gotten real powerful science, and we are now exponentially, hyperbolically just shooting into their world. This isn't the world of, Abraham Lincoln, which that was only, 8 generations ago or something like that. We are now in a completely different, we've got advanced AI, we've got genetic engineering, we're in transhumanism, a 24/7 digital surveillance control system that's unlike anything that's ever existed, information management that is orders of magnitude beyond anything that we could have imagined. So we are transforming now. And I personally believe that other intelligences have probably been monitoring this, and they now realize, okay, this group right here, they are now to be watched very carefully because they're now able to do things. They got nuclear weapons. They got all these other things. So I think we've brought in a lot of observers. And if I were them, I would just think about this from my own speculation point of view, but I would think one of them at least might want to get some kind of control over the management of this process. Why wouldn't they? If I were them, that's what I would want to do.
We obviously know some people who've been on the inside, who share things with us that we can't always report, who tell us that, you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. There is a race for this technology and trying to figure it out. I know when I started 35 years ago, I jumped into the deep end of the pool talking about reverse engineering programs out in the Nevada desert and crash saucers. And it was pretty far out there at the time. It's still far out there, maybe not as far now because other people have come forward. But they had not, to my knowledge, figured this stuff out at the time. They are of the opinion, and as Senator Reid and others were, that the Russians and Chinese are trying to do the same thing, that they've got crash recoveries. They're taking this stuff apart. Do you have your own assessment of where we are in that? If there is a race for that technology, how important it might be, whoever gets it first, and how far along we might be? Will we ever crack this stuff?
That's a really good question, George. I mean, over the years, I've had a variety of hypotheses. I coined the phrase breakaway civilization many years ago to address exactly what you are asking. And I wondered, is it possible for the classified world to, through their access, presumably through advanced ET technology, make breakthroughs that they would then classify, keep from the rest of us, and then continue on their path of technological development, essentially preventing the rest of the world from going down that road? And would that result in dramatic breakthroughs on their part? And, then over the years, we've had all kinds of stories. Are they true or not? The 1988 alien reproduction vehicle story that Mark McCandlish told through his friend Brad Sorensen. Is that true? I tend to think that that's true. Bob Lazar's story that, both of you guys and each of your way have dove deeply into. I believe that story. There's other guys. There's guys like Bill Uhouse, who's not even around anymore. He had his story about working on this secret technology. My tendency is to believe the most of those stories, at least the ones. I think all three of those are credible to me. If that's the case, then you have to ask, all right, so how far has the black budget world gone? I remember after the Tic Tac encounter came out, I had an off-screen argument with my pal Jimmy Church over the Tic Tac, and Jimmy's opinion was we had to have been making that. And I'm like, no way. I went back and forth on the phone with him. But it's a fair question. Like, could we have made something like that? And I guess I would say, in theory, we have the ability to make some pretty advanced craft using very likely some revolutionary science. But the fact is, when I get right down to it, when I look at the long history of the U.S. military's interactions with these objects, I think that most of these interactions are by objects that do not come from our society. So that leaves the question, what are we making and how far have we gone? And honestly, that is I go back and forth on that. I don't know how far we have gone. I don't know. Do we have the ability to go to the moon covertly using a black triangle that maybe Boeing makes? Maybe, but it's hard getting data on that. It's hard for me to get data on it. Do we have people who've made claims about Mars? I remember, when you look at the ARV story from 1988, the claim was that there was a 3 or 4 star who was talking about them at the time and stating that these objects, which we made, had traveled throughout the solar system. And, you read statements that come from Mark McCandlish. The ARVs apparently looked like they'd been run through the system. They'd gotten beat up. It looks like they'd been used. Did we fly them throughout the solar system? To this day, I don't know what I think about that. It's like a hall of mirrors, and what's true and what's not true. I suspect that we've got some very advanced technology that is dedicated solely for the ET phenomenon that is withheld from normal geopolitical warfare. This is too important. This would be why, we don't see any black triangles being used in America's theater of operations, because they're probably considered to be too important for mere geopolitical opportunities. So I suspect that there's something that is a breakaway type technology, but how far it goes, I can't say that I know.
And do you know anybody who knows the answer to the central questions? Who are they? Where are they from? Why are they here? Are they from somewhere else? I mean, the ET hypothesis is the dominant paradigm when I started, probably still is as well. It's not the only suggestion of what this non-human intelligence might be. But I don't know anybody who really knows the answer to any of that. I'm not sure there's anybody who knows.
I don't either. Not anyone who's really convinced me that they really know. There's lots of people out there. I'm sure there'll be comments below. They know what the answer is, but I have not met anyone who actually convinced me that they know for sure. I have strongly suspected that there's a genuine ET component to this. It's not, they may have the ability to play with dimensions in ways that we don't understand. By that, I simply mean space and time. Of late, I've just been getting into some interesting conversations, often with my wife, sometimes with other folks, about time. And time is a absolutely fascinating thing that our common sense doesn't really quite give us the truth about. I believe that. So I think that other civilizations have developed the ability to manage time in ways that we don't quite understand. That gives the appearance of them being interdimensional. But I suspect that they are from another planet, another world like we are from. And for the record, I tend to think now that that might be one reason why the oceans of this planet are very attractive for them. They are kind of a form of insulation from whether it's solar radiation or temperature fluctuations or who knows what else. It's actually, if you got enough technology to manage down there, it could be a very attractive option. But does anyone know? No, I don't know anyone who really absolutely knows that I've talked to.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question would be, Well, yeah, I guess the question would be, can you trust them? The communications that we may or may not have had with what we're calling the visitors, can you trust those communications? Because what you're seeing as a historian is, and let's talk about the oceans and water, but what you're seeing is a sort of observational programming that is clear. It's a durational, long-term, non-interference many times, but I suspect you have cases that show true intervention with humankind. So I guess the question is, was this the plan all along? Was it to help us develop into some technological kind of beacon for an intergalactic society? What really was the purpose of this observation or this intervention program? But the big question is, can we trust them? Can we trust, and who are they? Are there multiple? Can we trust it, what we think we know?
Yeah, you ask a lot of good questions there. So first of all, what do I trust? I trust one thing, and I trust my judgment. That's about all I can trust. So when I try to ask myself, what do I think these other beings are? The best thing that I can go on is my own personal judgment. I study the cases, as many cases as I can study. And at this point, I've studied many countless thousands of them. So I think I have a good understanding of how the interactions that people have with UFOs tend to be. I tend to think they are physical, very physical. There are instances in which sometimes they can wink in or wink out of someone's field of vision, but most of the time they don't do that. They travel, just like physical objects travel, using very advanced means. So my judgment is that they are from another physical place. That's what I think. Doesn't mean, again, that they can't be manipulating space-time in some way. You asked a couple of other really good questions there, Jeremy. You said, can we trust them? Oh, and you also asked, are they here as a way to kind of maybe guide us into a greater society? That is definitely a possibility. Sure it is. Also a possibility is that they are here because they are concerned about this new species starting to throw its weight around. I mean, we're inquisitive, we're assertive, we're aggressive. We are engaged in constant warfare. We are constantly engaged in warfare. So all of those things would have to get anyone's attention. That doesn't mean we're bad. It just, maybe we're like everyone else out there. But it does mean that we bear watching, I would imagine. Can we trust them? I don't know if we can trust anyone, really. I mean, we can't trust ourselves, and I don't know if we can trust anyone else. It's just like, you meet a new person, you don't automatically trust them. You have to get to know them. You have to understand. Everyone's got their own interests. That would include an alien species, just like it includes us. Sometimes those interests can coincide, and you can cooperate for mutual benefit. But there can always come a moment where they may have interests that don't coincide with ours. And does that mean that they're trying to do us evil, or does that mean they're just trying to take advantage in a big way or in a little way? These are difficult questions. We don't really know any answers until we need to get better confirmed information. Even the most dedicated UFO investigators, which probably include the three of us here, as hard as we work at this, to actually know for certain, can we trust these other beings? That's a tough one.
We don't know what their time frame is. We don't know. We know they've been here a long time, that we get fleeting glimpses of them. With rare exceptions, they don't make a display where it's indisputable. There they are, Phoenix lights in the sky. They try to stay out of our way, but they clearly are doing a surveillance operation. They're very interested in our military technology. They've taken our nukes offline. They've done that in Russia and other places in the world.
Oh, yeah.
We don't know what their time frame is, what the ultimate goal of this long-term surveillance is. You could see where our military might be worried about what the long-term objectives are.
They, in the book that I'm working on now, which is on USOs, water-based UFO phenomena, I think there have been a number of instances where they've essentially disabled our aircraft carriers, not just nukes. If you're running the U.S. Navy, I don't think there's anything more important than
our destroyers,
and destroyers as well, and battle cruisers, as well as Soviet instances as well. They had a few of them. So yeah, they can do all of that. They've got incredible capability. I will just add, we hear this a lot. They've been here forever. They've been here forever. Yeah and no. I mean, I actually got a different opinion on this. I look at the ancient UFO stories. I think I've read as many as that are available. And I'm not as impressed by a lot of that ancient evidence. I'm just going to say it. There's some early cases that are very interesting and intriguing. Yes. And so I would agree that we've probably been subject to a long-standing observation. I'm not going to deny that. But we have to ask, if they've been here a long time, who's the they? Have the Greys been here a long time? I don't see evidence of that. I see evidence that the Greys have been here since really the 20th century. I mean, you could look at the drawings of the Wagina in Australia, and they kind of look like Greys, but that's sort of an outlier. I don't really see a lot of other evidence for that. So there's been someone that's been here a long time, but who's the they? And is it one group or many groups? I think it's quite possible that we're dealing with more than one group. How many? What did John Lair say? Over 50, whatever it was, 54.
Yeah, it's wild theories.
Yeah, he was out there, but there are a lot of folks who believed in a high number, and that's possibly true. Have they all been here a long time? There's a lot we still don't know. When I look at the real quantity of genuinely good sightings, I see three phases. I see most of human history up to the 19th century of very limited numbers. Like, you might get a good sighting every 100 years or so, my opinion. 19th century things really do start picking up. 19th century, not just 20th century. There's some very good cases throughout the 19th century, and it makes me think maybe it's our ability to report that's improved, but then you definitely get a jump in during World War II. You definitely, and following it. I mean, MUFON and the National UFO Reporting Center are getting minimum 5,000 cases a year. Minimum. You get up in Canada, Chris Rutkowski over at University of Manitoba gets another couple of thousand a year. North America alone is getting minimum 12,000 raw reports every year. That doesn't mean they're all alien sightings. We all know that, but you go through those reports, they're pretty good. They're actually quite, like, at least 1 in 10 would probably make you just say, wow. And then, there's the rest of the world, which is vastly underreported. I've estimated that we're dealing with no less than 50,000 good UFO sightings around the world every year.
Wow.
I think 50,000 is low. I think it's probably much higher. Right. And then that doesn't include the actual traffic. You think of most UFO sightings, they're fleeting. You saw it by luck. How many cases have I read where someone will say, it was 2 a.m, I couldn't sleep, I went out for a smoke and I looked up and oh my God, there was a black triangle. I almost missed it. And it was hovering 300 feet over my neighbor's house. Like, what's up with that? So that very easily could have been missed. And then it was gone, you know. So how many are there that we don't see? It's unanswerable. But I just reason that if there's, and I think 50,000 is a minimum of good sightings, what's the factor of sightings that are not seen at all?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of activity going on here, a lot. And we need, this is the great question that I hardly ever hear asked by anyone. Forget the mainstream, but even in our community, what are they doing? Yeah. Are they still abducting people? Answer, yes, they are still abducting people. They are. Are those abductions good or bad? Well, that's a whole other thing, but it's going on. And that's just one aspect of this. So it seems to me like there's this massive infrastructure that they have. And it just makes me crazy to think, you know, the next congressional hearings are going to come along and someone's going to talk about, yeah, we've got some bodies, we got some tech. And I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Is like, what the hell is going on around the world every single day? What are they doing?
Right.
And are we ever going to get that answer? So, Jeremy, you asked a little while ago, are we going to get like a genuine disclosure about this? Well, there's just so much to disclose.
Right. Disclose what?
And so I don't think we're going to get a full one on this. And in fact, well, I'm talking too much. I know I'm your guest, but I'm talking way too much.
No, you're right. No.
I think that we're in an era where, I mean, look, the title of this is you have revolution in the title of this show. Yeah. And that's interesting because that's very much what I believe we are in right now. We are in a global revolution, top-down directed international revolution beyond UAP. It's the whole thing. We saw it with COVID. Complete, unified messaging globally over from social distancing to everything else. And as if each of those national governments were the same government. That's not by accident. And we're seeing now a complete digital transformation of our world, digital control over people, digital currencies are happening soon. That'll be a lot of fun. Essentially a 24/7 Minority Report surveillance state is happening, and that's transforming human society. And so that's called totalitarianism. That's the future, unless we do something to stop it. That's the tendency. That's the trend. Totalitarian. And so if that continues, we have to ask, can you have a genuine UAP disclosure within a global totalitarian system? That's really the question that I ask. I don't have an answer to that yet.
We've been thrilled to get an advanced glimpse of your next project. We've been hinting about it, USOs. Why did you focus on that? How far back does it go? What's the quality of the evidence that you've accumulated so far?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah, I was very happy to send both of you an advanced copy of my book. It's not done. I've added to it since I've sent you guys a PDF, but it's quite long, and it's the longest book I've ever written. I got into it a little less than 2 years ago. I have a website, richardolanmembers.com. Got a great, phenomenal community there. Brilliant people. We interact all the time. And someone asked me to deal with a particular case that took place in Adak Island, Alaska, on the Aleutians back in 1945. A famous case, kind of. So I did an exposition of that sighting, and I think maybe just looking at where Adak Island is on the map of the world, it's pretty remote. So in the Northern Pacific, you're just not going to go there for a vacation. But yet here you've got a ship that encountered a craft that appeared to come out of the water. And I thought, wow. So I wanted to look in some other USO cases. And I just started to ask myself, what are the sources on this? Like, who's actually done the work? There was one researcher, no longer with us, unfortunately, Carl Feit, who I did know Carl, who did great work on this subject. He was interested generally in the interaction of UFOs with water, including some transmedium cases, but not exclusively. So Carl wrote a book, which is a great book. He had a website, which I don't know if it's available anymore. It is and it isn't. But he collected a bunch of cases. So I went through that. And I thought, wow, there's some good ones here. And then I started going through the National UFO Reporting Center. And now I'm going through the full MUFON database and a bunch of others. So the question is, what's the quality of the evidence? And I have to say, these are different from reading FOIA reports. These are not, by and large, these are not U.S. government declassified documents that you can say, okay, the government authenticates this. No, that's not the case. 99% of them, let's say, are witness testimony. And, every time I read a new case, I have to read it. I have to decide, like, yes or no. Is this good enough or is this not good enough? I've excluded many, many cases that I believe are probably true, but don't have enough for us to work with. And so I've just left them out of the book. Many of them are U.S. military cases. A large number of cases that I've got in this book are from former U.S. Navy guys. Many. And a typical way in which you'd get it would be someone would write to, whether it's to National UFO Reporting Center or George Filer, who I love. George, still going. George is still going. And they'll say, well, I was in the Navy 25 years ago and this happened. And I can't really give much about my identity. I still have to be careful, but I was aboard the USS John F. Kennedy in 1971 or the USS FDR, whenever. And this is what happened. And this is what I have to go on. But I've elected to include these. I think they need to be included. We're in a dangerous position with UFO data where, we want absolutely confirmed data for these.
Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. It's 1 in the morning, and I don't have anyone watching really, so I think I'll call it a night. I'm tired. Gotta work tomorrow. Anyways, for the one viewer that is watching and the one that was here, thanks for stopping by, and hopefully tomorrow night we'll have some better luck with more viewers.